This is my fourth talk on dead languages. The last three were Latin, Akkadian, and Sumerian. We seem to be going down the scale of obscurity because the fourth one is Ugaritic, which most people have not heard of. I hope to persuade you during this talk that it was a very important language, particularly in the background of the late Bronze Age, which was a very exciting time, and also in better understanding the origins of the Hebrew Bible and Israelite religion. It's really the best source for what came before monotheism. But anyway, this is Ugarit. It's now called, the modern name is Ras Shamra, which translates as Cape Fennel, kind of spice. Why it's called that, I don't know. It's located on the North Syrian coast of the Mediterranean, about a few miles north of Latakia, a modern port city in Syria. And Ugarit was one of the major Canaanite city-states. And I'll come back to what Canaanite actually might mean, because it's a difficult ethnic term. And Ugarit flourished during the second millennium BC, and it was totally forgotten. It collapsed during the Sea Peoples episode, which I'm sure most of you are familiar with, in the 12th century BC. And it disappeared for 3,200 years. The site, in 1929, the site was actually discovered by a peasant doing his thing. And archaeologists recognized the importance of the site and began excavations very quickly. Now, Syria was under the French mandate at the time, so they were French archaeologists, and French institutions have controlled the fate of Ugarit, all the research, all the excavations ever since, right up until today. It's still a very active. The civil war, I'm sure, in Syria sort of killed a lot of it, but it survived World War II. I'm sure it will survive this. But the archaeologists moved in. They discovered thousands of cuneiform texts in multiple languages, particularly Akkadian and Ugaritic. And I gave a talk on Akkadian earlier. That's the major language of Mesopotamia. But it also became a lingua franca for the entire ancient Near East and the Bronze Age. So many different peoples used Akkadian. Now, they also recovered many physical objects. I won't be focused on that in this talk. Now, archaeologists initially thought that the vaulted tombs and painted pottery of Ugarit Cemetery indicated that the city was a Mycenaean colony. Now, the Mycenaeans were the people from Mycenae in Greece, mainland Greece, who created the great Mycenaean civilization on Crete, which is famous. But they realized, as they started studying the text, that it wasn't Greek that they were looking at. I don't think any instances of linear A or B have been found at Ugarit. It became clear that Ugarit's native language was something else. Now, Mycenaeans were indeed present there, but they were one constituent group of a very polyglot and cosmopolitan port city that included Hittites, Babylonians, Hurrians, and Egyptians, as well as the native Semitic Canaanites. If you have any questions, please ask while I'm talking. Now, it was eventually discovered Ugarit is one of the earliest representative of what could be called Canaanite. The term Canaanite is difficult. Its etymology is really unknown, though the Akkadian word for purple is kinaku, which can be linked to what the Greeks called the Phoenicians, who are, as we'll see, who are related to the Ugaritians, if I can call them that, Phoenicase. Now, the latter is an exonym. It was the Greeks' names for the Phoenician people, and that's what's called an exonym. It's like we call the Germans. The Germans call themselves Deutsch. The Italians call the Germans Tedesco. It was similar in the ancient world. The peoples would have their own names for foreigners, and so it's the Greeks who called the Phoenicians. Now, the Canaanites were a group of Semitic peoples who, during the 3rd and 2nd millennia BC, they occupied parts of what are now Syria, Lebanon, Israel, Palestine, and Jordan. They were never organized into a single political unit. Instead, there was no empire ever there was never a Canaanite empire ever formed like Egypt or the Hittites. Instead, they formed smaller city-states such as Ugarit, Byblos, Tyre, Shechem, and Jerusalem. Early on, they probably had a fairly uniform language, which scholars call Proto-Canaanite. That's the name for an unattested language, but you have good reasons to think it existed. The proto is the prefix you use for that. The date of Proto-Canaanite is uncertain. Unfortunately, we don't have any information on dialectal differences as far back as, say, the early second millennium BC, let alone the third millennium. Eventually, this Proto-Canaanite, which, by the way, is unattested, as I said, it's unattested in documents, it developed into the documented languages Phoenician, Hebrew, Ammonite, Edomite, Derala, etc. There are several more. These languages emerged around the beginning of the first millennium, i.e., at the beginning of what's called the Iron Age. Some of them are quite well known and well documented, like Hebrew and Phoenician. Others not so much, and others are only represented by a few inscriptions that we can't even really read very well. Now, the Canaanites were culturally fairly uniform. For example, they all used the newfangled alphabet, which had been developed in Egypt somehow in the middle of the second millennium. The origins of it are still quite obscure. This alphabet, which is the ancestor of ours, and actually all of the world's scripts outside of Asia, made the remarkable innovation of marking the individual sounds of a word, the vowels and the consonants, in other words, even though the early alphabets didn't mark the vowels, but they had the concept. Preceding that, the dominant form of writing all over was syllabic and logographic, which marked syllables and whole words, respectively. Alphabets had the considerable advantage of requiring a much smaller inventory of signs than syllabaries and logographic systems. For example, Phoenician had 22 letters. The Akkadian syllabary had hundreds of signs, therefore harder to learn. A disadvantage of these early alphabets, though, as I mentioned, is that they didn't indicate the vowels. The dominant syllabary at the time, Akkadian, which was used all over the Near East, did indicate the vowels. That's an advantage it had. Now, the lack of vowels makes it more difficult to understand what the Ugaritic texts are saying. Imagine if English didn't write vowels, then a sequence of letters like L and K, LK, it could stand for like, lake, lick, look, even alike with a vowel in first position, and so forth. Ambiguity would be rife. The native speakers evidently didn't have too many problems with this, and in fact, you could write English without vowels and you could make some sense out of it. After all, even though they didn't write the vowels, they still found the script quite useful for recording language. Modern scholars, however, have a much tougher time in dealing with that. It's a great many Ugaritic texts we don't understand very well at all. Now, later on in the first millennium, these alphabets, like Hebrew, they developed means of notating the vowels, but even to this day in other Semitic languages using descendants of these alphabets, such as written Arabic and Hebrew, they don't indicate the vowels except in special circumstances, such as religious texts, like the Quran, and religious texts always get greater care is taken with their pronunciation because both Islam and Judaism were very concerned with the precise reading of their holy scriptures. So they tended to, in fact, Hebrew developed a system that is the most precise phonetic rendering of an ancient language that's ever been done, the so-called Masoretic system. But if you pick up an Arabic newspaper, you'll see the long vowels written, you won't see the short vowels written. Arabic has had a distinction between long and short. Modern Hebrew makes great use of vowel letters. You don't know exactly what the vowel is, but you'll know it's either an O or a U vowel, alternatively an I or an E vowel. But you do have some help in reading. Anyway, now before we get to the more linguistic aspects of the Ugaritic language, if you notice, I'm sometimes saying Ugaritic and Ugaritic. I can't make up my mind. The natives usually must have said Ugaritic, but in English we tend to put an initial Y there. It's more comfortable with our pronunciation habits, I think. But before we get to the linguistics of the language, I'd like to give an overview of the political situation that Ugarit found itself in the 14th and 13th centuries BC. The site was occupied from the Neolithic period. We don't know anything about that hardly, but their flourishing period was just 2 centuries, the 14th and the 13th BC. Now, to my mind, I think this is one of the most fascinating periods in history. It's the late Bronze Age, and everything went to hell very quickly. And it's one of the great mysteries of history. But in a way, the political and cultural situation in the late Bronze Age in the Aegean, Eastern Mediterranean, Anatolia, Egypt, and Mesopotamia, and you can see all on our map, it has strong echoes of our own situation today. It was a complex international world in which many people, the Minoans, the Mycenaeans, the Hittites, the Assyrians, the Babylonians, the Mitannians, they're an obscure people, the Canaanites, the Cypriots, and Egyptians all interacted, creating a cosmopolitan and globalized regional system such as has only rarely been seen before today. This is the era of the first international diplomatic system, as represented by the Amarna archive of letters found in Akhenaten, which is the famous city established by the very famous Pharaoh Akhenaten, the famous worshiper of the sun disk. And I discovered in doing the research for this talk that everybody thinks of Akhenaten as a monotheist. He really wasn't. He was a duotheist, because the sun disk was the god, and Akhenaten was also a god. And common people couldn't worship the sun disk directly. They had to go through Akhenaten. So there were 2 gods in the system. Anyway, doesn't make much of a difference, I guess. But in addition to having a diplomatic system, Akkadian, a language of Mesopotamia, had become much like English in the world today, a lingua franca used by all the states in the region to communicate with each other. All the material at Amarna, this is in Egypt, remember, it's not written in Egyptian hieroglyphs, it's written in Akkadian, with the exception of one letter written in Hurrian. And the material at Amarna consists of diplomatic exchanges, letters between the kings and between vassals and their dominant overlord. There are several hundred of them. It's not a huge archive, but it's all we have. Now, the Amarna archive contains letters sent from king to king across the region, reflecting a strong interest in gift-giving, marriage proposals, and other concerns. Since the major states in the period exercised dominion over the smaller states, think Hittite Empire, the Mitanni Empire, and Egypt as the big guys, the archive has letters written from vassals in Canaan and other locales to the pharaohs and the other players requesting military aid or other assistance. Now, the Bronze Age, again, roughly 3000 to 1000 BC, is the first heavily documented instance of long-distance trade. For example, bronze, the metal which gave the name to the period due to its dominance as the metal of choice for such things as armaments and swords, was mined in Afghanistan, a great distance from the Mediterranean. It undoubtedly made its way to the Near East and to the Mediterranean in stages, from merchant passing it along to merchant, but it made it. Now, as a result, a very international set of merchants would establish themselves in various cities, and texts from Ugarit indicate that many different ethnicities had commercial interests there and combined to establish and control the long-distance trading routes which were being established then. And Ugarit, situated on the Syrian coast, was a critical node in this network. They were right on the seacoast. And this, I might say, this was also the age of great power competition, in particular with the Hittite Empire and the Egyptian jockeying for dominance in the land of Canaan, which is in between them, as you can see on the map. This is a little bit, I'm talking about a period where Mitanni was not quite so powerful as indicated here. At an earlier date, it was the Hittites versus the Egyptians that they sort of competed for control of this area. You have to sort of deal with the maps you can find on the web. This is, as you can see from the date, this reflects the situation in, where's my cursor? In 1400 BC. Now, other players were the Mitanni kingdom, as I mentioned, a powerful state at times, but also a bit mysterious. The language isn't well understood. It seems that a new ruling group, likely Indo-Iranian in origin, yes, Indo-Europeans, They took over at one point and dominated the native Hurrian population. Who the Hurrians were is very unclear. The language is thought to be related to only one other language, the Urartian language, which I don't think is on this map. But other people think it's a language isolate. That's the linguist term for a language that has no known relatives. And that, of course, if a language doesn't have any relatives, it makes it very, very hard to decipher, as you might imagine. Other powers in the region included the Babylonians and the Assyrians. And also, as part of this age, the first international treaty in history was produced in the Bronze Age. This would be the Treaty of Kadesh between the Hittites and the Egyptians trying to end their border dispute. The city of Kadesh was in the southern Syria, I believe. It's not on this map as I can see it, but it was recorded in both Hittite and Egyptian, and copies of each were stored in the respective capitals. The capital of Hatti was Hattusas, which is on the map. And in Egypt, I'm not sure where the government kept its copies, but it's a very well-preserved document. Now, this was probably a very happy world for some people, probably a very miserable world for a lot of others.
So Patty Robinson is asking, would lack of vowels tend to make the vocabulary rather small?
No. That's a good point. I'm just thinking of Arabic, which does have an enormous vocabulary, and they felt no great need in most of their documents to write the vowels. The greater factor in what caused them to not write the vowels so much, and right at the very beginning, like Phoenician, they didn't write any vowels at all. You just had the consonants. But what you have in the Semitic languages, I'll get into it when I get into the linguistics, is that the consonants and vowels play very different roles in the language. So you can figure out the meaning of a word just by saying the consonants. And I'll try to explain that down the road a little bit. But Semitic languages have very big vocabularies. Even Arabic is a modern major language, so I've seen estimates of native speaker vocabulary at about 25,000 items, which is comparable to English. And that's passive vocabulary, words that people can recognize, not words they actually speak. I mean, there's a whole bunch of, if you're literate and you read a fair amount, there's a whole bunch of words you know, but you never say them because they're too formal or too obscure. But Arabic and English, modern Arabic and modern English are quite comparable in vocabulary size. But there are reasons for their ignoring the vowels in the early stages of the languages. So I hope that was helpful. There are dozens of maps about the arrival of the Sea Peoples in the Eastern Mediterranean. This happened around 1250 BC. And very bad things started to happen. And I must say that there's been an enormous amount of scholarly ink spilled over the nature and identity of the Sea Peoples. And there really is no consensus right now. Now, there is a traditional view, which was developed early, was kind of a 19th century view, and it goes like this. The Eastern Mediterranean was rocked by wave after wave of invasions. In the Aegean, the Dorian invasion into Greece effectively brought an end to Mycenaean civilization. Slightly later, the Near East was also invaded by what modern scholars call the Sea Peoples. There are a number of theories on who the Sea Peoples were, that they were refugees from the Dorian invasion, as I said, that they were escaping famine in Anatolia, Anatolia, by the way, is the ancient name for what is now the country of Turkey, but it's the same geographical area. The Sea Peoples may even have come from the Western Mediterranean. Now, whatever their origins, they had a major impact on Mediterranean history. Some scholars think that the invasion of the Sea Peoples effectively shifted the economic and political center of gravity of the Mediterranean world away from the Near East and towards the central Mediterranean. As you can see from this nice Spanish language map, basically everything with the flame icon was destroyed, including the Hittite Empire, various Ugarit. You can see it right in what is today northern Syria. Other states, Carchemish, Alalak, Aleppo, which is still with us, but it was destroyed. Over into Mesopotamia with Sippar. These are both major Mesopotamian cities, Sippar and Nippur. Knossos, capital of the Mycenaean Empire, was destroyed. It really was a disaster. The blue icons here indicate cities that were either not attacked or they fended off their attackers. And that's the traditional view. Now in Egypt, Egypt is the only state that managed to fight off the Sea Peoples. So they came through it, greatly reduced in power, but the state did not disappear. It continued. The Hittites, for example, that's when they disappeared from history. And they turn up as a strange people. Uriah the Hittite in the Bible, where the Israelites, they knew the name, and so they wrote it into a Bible story. But whether Uriah had anything to do with the historical Hittites is rather unclear. But they knew the name. Now there's a newer view. There's been an extensive revision of this traditional one. Eric H. Klein, he's the professor at, he's a professor, Cornell. Well, he wrote a book in 2014 called 1177 BC, the year civilization collapsed. He did a revision and a second edition of it just last year. His argument is that the category Sea Peoples really is not defined. We know very little about them beyond what Egyptian sources tell us. The Egyptians, by the way, never called them the Sea Peoples. That's modern terms. Why I mention the Egyptians is and not say the Hittites, is the Egyptians gave the most complete description of the Sea Peoples when they attacked, when they attacked Egypt. We are not certain where the Sea Peoples originated, perhaps in Sicily, Sardinia, and Italy, perhaps in the Aegean or Western Anatolia. Maybe, as I said, maybe even Cyprus or the Eastern Mediterranean. No ancient site has ever been identified as the origin of the departure point. They're usually viewed as moving relentlessly from site to site, overrunning countries and kingdoms as they went. According to the Egyptian texts, they established themselves in Syria before proceeding down the coast of Canaan and into the Nile Delta of Egypt, where Egypt managed to defeat them. And it's generally accepted by scholars. The Egyptian inscriptions pertaining to this, they accept as genuine, not propaganda. They really defeated them. But according to the ancient Egyptians, some of the Sea Peoples came by land, others by sea. They had no uniforms. Ancient images, which the Egyptians kindly provided, shows one group wearing feathered headdresses, while another group had skull caps. Some were bareheaded. These observations, according to Klein, suggest that the Sea Peoples actually were comprised of diverse groups from different places and different cultures. In any event, it was in 1177 BC, approximately, which is why Klein named his book 1177 BC, that the Sea Peoples pushed into Egypt. It was the 8th year of Pharaoh Ramses III's reign. He had this to say in a papyrus document about the struggle against them and its outcome. I overthrew those who invaded from their lands. I slew the Danuna, the Cheker, and the Peleset. Now, the Peleset is the only identified group, and they're generally accepted to be the Philistines. It's not, as I said, it's not known who the other groups were, but the Cheker and the Peleset were made ashes. The Shadana and the Weshesh of the sea, they were made as those that exist not, taken captive at one time, brought as captives to India like the sand of the shore. But as I said, this is the one point to make about this: the Egyptians did not see the Sea Peoples as a unified force. There were 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. There's six groups, and modern scholars are willing to accept the Peleset as being the Philistines, who later settled in the southern Levant, famous as the Philistines from the Bible, because the Israelites hated them. And the Israelites wrote the history. The Philistines have come down to us as people with bad taste, but they got that reputation from the Israelites. Now, Ramses goes, from this quotation, Ramses goes on in the same vein, but as I said, Egypt was lucky. Many other states in the Near East did not fare so well, including Ugarit. It was destroyed about 1185 is Klein's estimation, but there's no scholarly consensus. So all dating is approximate in the ancient Near East that far back. It was never rebuilt. The events that took place over several decades around the date, in effect, represent a total civilizational collapse. Everything went away. The trade routes, the major empires, it really must have been an awful time. Now, the other thing that disappeared is what has been called the palace-based economies. Generally, things like the Hittite Empire and the Mycenaean and the Egyptian in particular, everything would have been, all economic activity would have been sort of rotating or focused around the palace. The economies were very top-down and centralized. These palace-based economies disappeared at the time of the collapse, and many more small-scale states started to emerge, such as the Israelites or Phoenicians around 1000 BC. For the Israelites, I think the oldest tested inscription in Phoenician is 1100, and the oldest, the usual date for the Exodus from Egypt for the Israelites when they moved to Canaan is given as 1250, around this time actually. Now, according to Klein, the causes of this catastrophe are more complex than the traditional narrative. First, it must be stated, it is not always clear who or what caused the destruction of the late Bronze Age cities, kingdoms, and empires. There is no scholarly consensus as to these causes. Candidates include attacks by foreign enemies, social uprising, natural catastrophes such as earthquakes, famine, plague, and of course climate change, which most probable cause is the one you're thinking about the most in when historians write things. And of climate change specifically, Klein fingers a mega drought reaching from the Aegean into the Near East as to the most important cause of all this trouble. Now, when he looks at all the possibilities, he does a good job of going through the latest research. They can evaluate, study pollen counts in the Eastern Mediterranean to establish what the water levels were like and so forth. How that works, I don't know. But Klein comes to the conclusion that all the above-mentioned possible causes occurred in various places in the region. But as I said, the most important factor was that mega drought that lasted 150 years and possibly 300 years, beginning around 1200 BC. Quoting Klein, "I'm inclined to think that this mega drought is likely to have been the principal driving force behind many of the problems that late Bronze Age societies faced. For example, the texts from sites like Ugarit in Syria confirmed that with the drought came famine, with people starving, and with famine came upheaval, including armed attacks and internal rebellion." You see, he doesn't use the term, but Klein is proposing a domino effect explanation. First, lack of water, then hunger, then resulting social unrest. In the end, if you pull together the textual and archaeological evidence, poor Ugarit likely got hit with many different things successively in its last few decades of existence. An earthquake, one text mentions an earthquake, which they think damaged the city but did not destroy it. But then famine did descend on the city. There's one letter from a princess saying that there is no food. Another text says, in quite gripping fashion, that enemy ships have been spotted off the coast. So the scenario is famine, is drought, famine, enemies moving in. At first, the enemy overruns Ugarit's port area. That's a place called Ras ibn Khani in the modern world, and threatens Ugarit. The city is destroyed in battle, and they have found arrowheads and skeletons in the city. And it was destroyed so thoroughly, it was never really reoccupied. It was never rebuilt and slipped from history. But it did live on in the memories of the Israelites, at least part of the pantheon. Now I'm going to do a little bit of linguistics after that historical interlude. We'll get back to the linguistics of the Ugaritic language. Here's a tree structure that indicates the historical relationships of the Semitic languages. It is based on the degree of similarity that linguists have detected between the languages, and they have grouped them accordingly. This tree structure also indicates time depth. The higher up you go, the farther back in time you are. The top node is labeled Proto-Semitic. This represents the putative ancestor of the whole Semitic family. The term Semitic, by the way, was the creation of a German scholar, A. Schlitzer, I believe his name was, in 1781. He thought that these languages, well, he imagined that these languages were those of the descendants of Shem, one of the three sons of Noah. Scholars at the time reasoned that since the flood wiped out the entire population of the planet except for Noah's family, that all the world's languages had to descend from his sons. And the name Semitic has stuck despite its less than scientific basis. Now, proto-language, like Proto-Canaanite at a later date, there's no proto in front of that, there should be. Proto-Semitic was an undocumented language that scholars think the latest possible date for is the 4th millennium. It is thought that early speakers of Semitic entered Southwest Asia from Africa, perhaps in the late 5th or the early 4th millennium. Fingering Africa as the source of the Semitic languages, it has reached no consensus among scholars. The traditional source of the Semitic peoples is the Arabian Peninsula, but there's no agreement about that. People even think they may have come from modern-day Libya, which creates difficulties because in order to migrate, they would have to go through Egypt, and I wouldn't buy that, but some scholars have proposed it. Now, the next split down on this tree is between West Semitic and East Semitic. West Semitic, these are the languages of Mesopotamia, the Semitic languages of Mesopotamia, and these is the Western languages, Ethiopian, modern South Arabian, Arabic, and Canaanite, Ugaritic, and some really obscure ones, some alien and so forth. Now, this West and East split is based on major structural differences between the languages. I won't go into it here, but Akkadian and Eblite are very different. You see, and oops, can you see the entire tree? Okay. Hello.
Yes.
Okay. Now, these languages, there's a very lopsided split, as you can see. The only languages in the East are these four: Babylonian, Assyrian, Akkadian, Eblite. And then you have the rest of Semitic. But linguists feel there's such a major difference between the two branches that it's justifiable to split them. Now, I'll skip everything in between pretty much and go right down to Northwest Semitic. And you can see the Canaanite is here. And as I said, some languages here, very well known. Moabite is not so well known. It's the closest language to Hebrew of any, I believe. It was spoken east of the Jordan River, but there's only one lengthy inscription by a king that we have for Moabite. Now, in the classification of Ugaritic within Northwest Semitic is highly controversial. This is one view. This tree gives it as an independent language within Northwest Semitic, i.e., it isn't connected there aren't any secondary nodes connecting Ugaritic to Aramaic or to Canaanite. It's out there by its own. Other scholars would put Ugaritic directly into the Canaanite branch, saying that it has enough features and it's similar enough that it should be in there with Hebrew, Phoenician, and Moabite. One issue here is that Ugaritic is attested, as I mentioned, from the 14th and 13th centuries. And the first indication of Hebrew and Phoenician and Moabite are really around 1000 BC. So Ugaritic in general looks more archaic than these languages, mainly because they're just younger. Ugaritic has a lot of older features that I won't get into. I'll get into some of them in great detail, but it just looks older. In many ways, it looks a lot like Arabic, which is interesting. But now, the decision to create a Canaanite node uniting these languages and say all these languages, for these languages, Hebrew, Phoenician, and Moabite, there was a preceding stage of Proto-Canaanite, which was a more or less unitary language from which they all descended. And there's a set of features that sort of derive that. All the Canaanite languages have a shift of long A to O, and Ugaritic does not. And that's one reason why it's over here. But long A to O should be very familiar, because it's the reason that Hebrew says shalom and Arabic says salam, because the Arabic reflects the original pronunciation of that second vowel in shalom and salam. Hebrew is a much more, linguists say Hebrew is a more innovative language than Arabic say. And it's in many other ways you can illustrate that.
John,
Yes.
question: how do we know this about the vowels when the alphabets don't represent vowels?
Indirect evidence. I don't get into that in great detail. For example, for Ugaritic, there's a very large number of texts written in Akkadian that contain a large number of Ugaritic loanwords. And Akkadian, as I said, it writes the vowels. So it's indirect, it's sometimes uncertain, but that's how you have to do it. And that's just one example. In Phoenician, for example, there's a famous case who was very conservative about writing vowels, but Plautus, the Roman comic dramatist, 3rd century BC, he wrote a play called Pointillus, the little Punic guy, I think is how you would translate it. But he actually, in trying to make fun of the Punic people, who were the Phoenicians who dominated northern Africa, and their capital was Carthage, he wrote a play in which he was imitating what he thought was the sound of Punic speech, and that's how we know about vowels. But it's all very indirect and incomplete. Does that answer the question?
Yes, thank you.
Yeah, it's all. But you're right. I thought of that when preparing this. Somebody is going to ask, how can we talk about vowels? Yeah, at this time, Hebrew started, it became a gradual process. I know Hebrew the best. They started writing using the letters H, well, hey, yo, yod, and vav to write, indicating vowels at the end of a word. And then after that, they started writing them in the middle of a word. And that's it sort of gradually spread. And again, a lot of it was in the case of the Holy Scriptures, the Tanakh. A lot of it was they wanted to ensure the pronunciation would be maintained accurately.
John, we have a couple more questions here, so just to keep it going. First question is, as relates to this, and we'll come back to the earlier question. Thank you for this talk. Where does a modern Kurdish fit into this tree?
It doesn't fit into the tree. Kurdish is an Iranian language.
Okay.
It's Indo-European. It's related to, I don't know this substructure of Iranian that well, but it's related to languages like Persian and Dari and Pashto, and there are many Persian languages, both ancient. The most ancient Persian language is Old Persian. That's a natural name for it, but it's a big language family, and Kurdish is one of its members.
I see. One of my own questions is, if you look at this chart, where does a cuneiform starts and ends, and then starts, or they kind of like are intertwined, and then actual more modern writing system starts? Not modern, but at least, you know, something that we can put on paper without using the you know, the animals and, you know.
Yeah, it's well, it's the script. The first, well, first of all, for Akkadian, I don't have, this is just Semitic languages, so I don't have Sumerian, which is non-Semitic. The Sumerians invented writing, but they first did it was pictograms, as they call them. They just wrote pictures of things. If you wanted to indicate a dog, you drew a picture of a dog. Over time, it became much more abstract and formalized, and became what's called a syllabary. They wrote the phonetic syllables of words, and that was a system, as I said, Sumerians invented it around the turn of the 3rd millennium. It lasted down to about 200 AD, when it finally got overcome by the alphabets. Now, the alphabet itself was much younger. The first, what we would call an alphabet, was invented in Egypt using elements from Egyptian hieroglyphs. And it was a really brilliant decision. It was the first time that people had written the sounds of the component sounds, both they could recognize the consonants were different from vowels. They chose to represent the vowels, but it was the first time that ever happened. And that, starting in 1600 BC, it just spread through all the West Semitic languages for the most part. It became the writing system for Hebrew, Phoenician, Aramaic. Now, I'm getting ahead of myself. Why don't I go? I can talk about the Ugaritic alphabet, and I'll continue discussing the difference between syllabaries and alphabets. But basically, alphabets took over the world, and they overcame the older syllabic and logographic systems. And now every alphabet in the world, except the writing systems in Asia, are descended from these systems. And now what you're looking at here are the cuneiform signs of the Ugaritic alphabet. Now, you have to understand the Ugaritians used cuneiform to write their alphabet. Other people did not use, like Phoenician and Hebrew, they did not use cuneiform. Cuneiform is a writing technique where you take a stylus, usually a reed pen that has had its head cut into a triangle, to inscribe signs in wet clay. And this is a sample of Ugaritian writing. Now, what you see on the what you see here is the Ugaritic alphabet, and you see the signs. People were just incising using a reed clay and pushing it into the wet clay and creating these things. And these are the values that scholars discovered. And what's fascinating about this is from the 1400 BC, and it gives you an idea of the cultural conservatism, a tenacity of alphabet. It basically is using, there are many differences, of course, but it's basically using the same order that we learn in school of the letters, A, B, C, D. And here you can see A, B, G, well, that's Greek, alphabet, gamma. We substituted in C there at one point. But you can see A, B, C, D, D, A, B, C, D, E. Remember, this is only consonantal, no vowels. C, D, D, F, G, H, K, L, M, N. That's exactly our order with a lot of other letters in between. So it's really astonishing when you think about it. And as I see these other, and as Q, R, that's the same order we use in English today, as we all learned in primary school. The Ugaritic scribes, or somebody invented it, back in the second millennium BC, and it's still with us. It's really quite astonishing. So Ugaritic also has a word divider. One thing I should mention is this is actually what's called this tablet is an epicetary. AB. It's a tablet that contains the order of the alphabetical signs, only consonants, that the Ugaritian scribes would learn, and that's these signs here. There's A, B, G, and so forth.
So, John,
Yes.
do these cuneiform signs, are they valid syllables in Akkadian?
No, these shapes are completely different from the
So
ones in Akkadian. In fact, there's a great.
They're using the reed pen, but they're not taking the characters from the cuneiform.
No, they did not use Akkadian. There may be exceptions. I'm not a specialist in Ugaritic, but by and large, they did not have they didn't use, as Akkadian used Sumerian pictograms.
Right.
The Ugaritian scribes did not use Akkadian pictograms. I don't think I've ever seen one. They wrote everything alphabetically.
So they kind of just made it up.
Yeah, it's an independent invention. What's independent, though, is they were looking very much at an alphabet that had been given to them because it was invented in Egypt several centuries before. Somehow it migrated around, but they changed the technique of writing. They used the Akkadian and Sumerian technique of clay tablets and styluses, but the structure is alphabetical. It's really very interesting to contemplate. And nobody knows why they did this. I mean, they stuck with the clay, even though clay was much more cumbersome than the parchment of papyrus that people were using at the time with the alphabets. But
excuse me, I have a question here. So on the chart, look like the Egyptian, the ancient Egyptian language is not belong to the Proto-Semitic language. Okay, and
No.
the written form is borrowed from the Egyptian written symbol. No,
the writing system was not based on Egyptian hieroglyph. The alphabetical writing system was not the original proto one, if you can call it that, was not based on the Egyptian system. The Egyptian was a combination of pictures and phonetic indicators, and that's not known too well. As the Egyptians had a perfectly good Arabic from the perfectly good alphabet from the earliest days. It's just they also used the wonderful images that we call hieroglyphics, and you have to get this firmly in your grasp, is that the letters indicate the vowels and the consonants, and the pictograms are indicating concepts. And what's the critical difference is, if you see an alphabetical representation of a word like bad or good, just looking at the symbols, you can tell what the pronunciation is. In image-based systems, also called logographic-based systems, you get no help as to the pronunciation. You know it's a boy, but you have to be a speaker of the language to know what the pronunciation is. The writing system doesn't help you.
Yeah, now, the Chinese language is totally this way.
Excuse me?
I mean, the Chinese language is totally this way. You know what they mean, but you don't know how to pronounce it.
That has its advantages, because Chinese has many dialects, and some people will call them different languages, and you can write different languages with the same set of signs. So it gives a greater sense of unity in the world.
But my question is, the reason I'm asking this is, this written form is totally invented by the Ugarit people, or?
No, they borrowed the alphabet, but the manner in which they wrote it, they invented themselves. Now, it gets more complex because it ended up Phoenician only has 22 letters in its alphabet. The Ugaritian alphabet, how many? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Has 30. The Ugaritic alphabet has 30 letters because it has sounds that Phoenician didn't have. Like this one here, Phoenician doesn't have this sound, which in English is a the. It's a sound we pronounce in THE, the definite article. And Ugaritic had it, Phoenician didn't have it. Basically because of sound change, because of language change, Ugaritic being 3 or 4 centuries older than either language, Ugaritic maintained distinctions in sounds that were lost in the younger languages. Which I hope that was clear. But yeah, it's a complicated business. The Ugaritians borrowed the basic alphabet. They added a few of their own signs. They created the look, the look and feel of all the letters. These signs are not related to any others, not the Akkadian ones. And then they accepted the order that had been given to them, because that's the order in every alphabet derived from the original one. So they invented some and preserved other things.
So, quick question, John, just to get a perspective on Ugarit. Was Ugarit, you would think, would be like a Rome? We had a hodgepodge of various ethnicities, and that's why the alphabet is so complicated, because there's just so many people involved in that city. It was connected, right? The Minoan,
Well, it was a very multilingual city. There are many, particularly Akkadian texts, but there are also Hurrian texts. And Hurrian and Akkadian are both, they never adopted the alphabet. They stuck with syllabic cuneiform all the way. But it was just a linguistic, I would find it exciting. Most people would find it a mess. So And if you think about it, Akkadian was probably the lingua franca among merchants too. We don't have much information about that. When you get a bunch of people from different languages and ethnicities living together, they have a way of establishing a common language. And today it's English, for whatever reason, British Empire, the US, whatever reason. But Akkadian became the dominant language for cross-group communication.
Right.
And I don't know if there's any evidence for it was certainly used in the government chanceries when the pharaoh would have a team of scribes who would generate Akkadian letters to send to his Hittite counterpart, and the Hittite emperor would turn around and do the same thing. They employed Akkadian-speaking scribes, and that was probably good times for employment of Akkadian scribes, because you can imagine people leaving, trained, and literacy was such a maybe 1% of the population was literate at this time, and it was a heavily professional job. The royals would have, but whether merchants in Ugarit, how a Hittite merchant communicated with, an Egyptian merchant, I don't think there's much information on that.
I have a question. So when you talk about literacy, it's the ability to read and write. And what about speaking, about the sounds these letters make? For example, an illiterate person knowing how to speak the language and to teach it to their children. I don't know if I'm getting quite to what I'm thinking, but sort of like dialect or accents that we have here in the United States. Did this become a uniform language at the time that it was being used?
There's no Ugarit was a very small, it was a city-state, as I said, which means it consisted of a city and a small farming area surrounding it. It was probably no more than 20 miles by 10 miles sitting on the coast. So there's not much room for linguistic variety there, except we don't have any evidence of it. Now, there were certainly different styles. There's some, when people write a religious hymn I'll get into the Ugaritic religion in a little bit. When they write hymns, it's going to be in a level of language that's higher than what people speak in the streets. But since we only have documents and no tape recordings of what happened in Ugarit linguistically, there's no information on that. Actually, for ancient Hebrew, there have been many books written on the subject. What is what we find in the Bible? Is that some special high version of the language only used in religious texts? And were the ancient Hebrew, the soldiers and the butchers and who have you, were they speaking something else? We just don't know. Does that answer the question?
Yeah, it's just a curiosity. And I realize unless you're a first person observing, yes, that it's too way out there to actually truly know. But thanks.
Well, dealing with the ancient history, there are more unknowns than knowns many times.
Right.
So I mean,
that's what makes it so fascinating.
Yes, but it's more than guesswork. Like we know, like this order of the alphabet thing. I just remember the Hebrew alphabet, as in modern Hebrew today. It's Aleph, Bet, Gimel, Daled, Hey, Vav, Zayin, Chet, Tet, Yud, Kaf, Lam, Mem, Nun. What comes out? Nun, Samek, Ayin, Pei. Well, my Hebrew alphabet is running out. Well, maybe some of you can help me, but it's exactly alphabet. It's exactly A, B, C, D, E, F. Well, it's not quite A, B, C, D, E, F, G. It's what we learn.
Shin after the P.
Yes.
Shin.
Jason have a raised hand. Jason, go ahead. Sorry.
Yeah. The quick question is on your previous chart. Okay, look like today, up to today, only Hebrew, Arabic, and Aramaic survive. None of them have a trace.
Hebrew died. It was resurrected in the 19th century, and it came into its own with the foundation of the state of Israel. Arabic has been rolling along for, the Quran was composed in the 7th century, and it's still with us. It's one of the most language. It's a world language with one of the largest populations of speakers. Semitic is interesting that way. Moabite, you get one inscription because it's ancient. Phoenician, you have a very large merchant, trade-oriented civilization that dominated from Syria all the way to modern-day Morocco. And then the Romans destroyed it. Aramaic it was the major language of the ancient Near East until Arabic arose and supplanted it. But there's still forms of Aramaic spoken in Syrian villages, but it's restricted to a few thousand people. Ugaritic, as I said, is long gone. Somalian, that's a little known language. Derala, I don't even know if they can even read it. And Akkadian's gone, Ebelite's gone. Ethiopian, that's an interest. I might want to give a talk on that. Ethiopian was what's represented here is what an old language from Ethiopia. It's the language of the Ethiopian Christian Church. And it has died as a spoken language, but it has descendants, near descendants in Amharic, which is the national language of Ethiopia today, and it has over 100 million speakers. So there's it's a whole patchwork. Some of these languages are extremely successful, others are dead and forgotten.
And who used the similar to Moabite?
Well, Moabite is considered the closest to Hebrew. And that's
This
based
one,
on
Moabite, okay. And is any trace on this one? So today's Hebrew is different than...
Yeah, today's Hebrew, well, that's a complicated question. A modern day Israeli native speaker of modern Hebrew can pick up the Bible and read it. It's like us and Shakespeare. They always say Shakespeare is hard to read because 10% of the words have dropped out or that he used are no longer part of English. So you have to make a special effort to read Shakespeare. Okay. And that's true of modern day Israelis in the Hebrew Bible. There'll be words there they don't know. There'll be grammatical constructions that have gone out of use. But in general, it'll make sense to them. Hello.
Yeah, I got it. Yeah, thank you.
Okay, everything went quiet for a moment. I hope that answered the question.
Oh yeah, it's complex, and then I find out this chart interesting because I'm interested in the Chinese history. So during the 10th century, China has like many states, many countries with Manchurian, with Mongolian, with the Tagat people, Xixia, this kind of people. They all use the Chinese language or some Western language to create their own language, and then they die out.
Yeah, it's one. I'm not a Chinese expert, obviously, but China is its own. Chinese language has been remarkably resistant to conquest by other peoples. It's never been supplanted. In fact, a lot of people link it to the sheer density of the population in southern China. As I remember, it's the Manchus are famous conquerors of China from the north, and they gave up their language and adopted Chinese, which is fairly unique in world history. So
yeah, I think the funny thing is they use Chinese character to make their own language. That's very interesting.
Yeah, it's all. Korean is an interesting case. That they invented their own alphabet. It's one of the most intelligent. They say that the easiest language to learn because that's the relatively modern 16th century. Well, the king appointed a committee and they actually came up with a very good alphabet for Korean. But what's interesting is when the Koreans write their alphabet, they sort of arrange the letters to make them look like Chinese signs. The square box look. It's very interesting. But Anyway, where was I? Okay, as far as the decipherment goes, it was pretty easy, the decipherment of Ugaritic. For one reason, Ugaritic has a word divider, like we use white space. The Ugaritians had a little vertical stroke they would use to divide the words. So starting out, the scholars knew what the words were. In a lot of languages, you don't have any white space between the words, Chinese and Japanese being examples of that. And that's a real, figuring out where the word starts and ends is a task you have to solve. Now, Ugaritic was deciphered in less than a year. 3 scholars deciphered it independently, and a test was given to them. They mailed them a document they hadn't seen before, a Ugaritic document, and they all got the same document, and all 3 gave it more or less the same transcription, so that they knew the letter values very quickly. Now, I assume there wasn't any cheating involved. This was back in around 1930, so communication with no email or anything, so communication was somewhat spottier. But the reason it was so easy, the decipherment, it was pretty clear Ugaritic was likely, they knew out of the box, was likely to be closely related to Hebrew and Phoenician. And so the scholars just assumed that. And that allowed them to just, well, if Ugaritic is like Hebrew and Phoenician, let's look around for words in the text that look like Hebrew, words in Hebrew and Phoenician. And one such, they saw a sign sequence, th. Where is it? Th. There it is, th. They saw this sign sequence, th, followed by L, 3, followed by another th. That's thalath. Now, there are only few words in a typical Semitic language that show identity of the first and last element, that th, L, th. And one of them is the numeral 3, thalath. In Ugaritic, it's thalath in Arabic and shalosh in Hebrew. So, the decipherment was facilitated by all just studying co-occurrence of letters and looking at the patterns and assuming it's like other Canaanite languages. And so they were able to come up, over time, they came up with a great store of knowledge about Ugaritic. Now, in general, when reconstructing, if you see something like a th, L, and th in Ugaritic, you have a word thalath in Arabic, and you have shalosh in Hebrew. Arabic is AA, Hebrew is AO. So which do you reconstruct for Ugaritic? Well, generally, the scholarly consensus is you go with Arabic, because Arabic is phonetically far more conservative than Hebrew. And Phoenician isn't so useful here. And again, Arabic doesn't write the vowels, but it does in sources like the Quran. So we do know what the real value of thalath is, in what the vowels are in Arabic. So it gets complicated. So actually, in general, assuming Ugaritic works a lot like Arabic, works out very well in many respects, because Arabic is amazingly archaic. You can open an Arabic newspaper today and see dual forms, that's DUAL, being used freely. Now, to a dual, some languages like English only have a singular and a plural. Boy, boys, dog, dogs. You can indicate one thing or multiple things. And in Chinese, they don't have numbers, so it's always boy. There's no plural form. But in Arabic and Ugaritic, languages like that have a singular, a dual, and a plural, where the dual is used for 2 things, and plural is used for 3 or more things. So you have something like boy, and I'm trying to, this is an imaginary, what if there was a dual form in English and it was boyt, B-O-Y-T? You would have boy, 1 boy, boy, 2 boys, boys, 3 or more boys. But we don't have boy, we just don't do that. Now, what's interesting, Arabic uses the dual freely. If you're talking about 2 things, no matter what it is, people, animals, plants, you use a dual form. And Ugaritic does the same thing. Now, that means as you're seeing a phenomena that you can see in an Arabic newspaper today, and you can see it in a Ugaritic text from 3,200 years ago, which means Arabic has some amazingly old material, which is quite astonishing. Now, I should say there's a slight caveat here. It's the dual is only in written Arabic, the formal standardized form of the language. The Arabic dialects they've lost the dual for the most part. That's true of Indo-European too, by the way. Homeric Greek had a dual, which was lost in later Greek, but it was there in Indo-European as well. Now, in general, I say that this decipherment went easily. That what decipherment generally means is understanding the writing system, i.e. you can identify the sound values of the characters. Now, these sound values are only approximate. We know it's a B, the second sign here, but we don't know what kind of B it was. Was it a B as in English where the lips were tightly closed together, or was it more like in Spanish where the lips are spread a little bit when they pronounce it? We don't know that, but we know it's a B, and we know all of these sounds have a possible range of pronunciation, and we don't know where in that range the Ugaritic sounds are. So in general, we don't have a very good idea of the overall phonetic quality. Like if you think Spanish and Italian are very closely related, some people think, I've had Italians claim they're mutually intelligible. I don't think so. But Spanish and Italian are very closely related, but the overall phonetic quality is very different. You can tell one from the other immediately. But we don't have that kind of information for a language like Ugaritic. We don't really know what it sounded like when, Ugaritian just speaking it on the street, how it would come out. We don't know that. Now, decipherment really just talks about the identity of the values you assign to the letters. There's a whole lot of words we don't understand in Ugaritic. We understand mainly the words that have close counterparts in other Semitic languages. But there's a lot of words in Ugaritic documents that don't have counterparts in other Semitic languages. So in general, I would characterize Ugaritic as only somewhat figured out. If you want to put something on a scale, Akkadian is another dead language. They wrote the vowels. We have a good grasp of that. But in Ugaritic, their entire text, we can't make out the topic of. What are they talking about? And others, you can do a better job. But in general, it's sort of semi-interpreted language. And that's, it gives scholars a lot of work to do, but also a lot of guesswork. Now,
yeah, I have a question. Okay, are they writing from left to right or?
It was left to right.
So look like the chart you show. Some are left to right, some are right to left.
Yeah, cuneiform is typically left to right. The alphabet was right to left. So Akkadian used cuneiform, Eblaite, that's left to right. Some of the inscriptions, no, I'm getting confused with Chinese. Chinese, they can be vertical. But Eblaite and Akkadian, left to right. Ethiopian has a variety of the alphabet, which has both. I've given you a simplified picture. You have three types of writing systems: the logographic, the syllabic, and the alphabetic. You can also have combinations of them. And Ethiopian they'll use the alphabetical symbols, but they started adding vowel indicators to each of the letters. And it's not completely an alphabet because it's not entirely predictable what those vowel indicators are. So they have to use about 150 signs, 170 signs in their, it's a hybrid really of an alphabet and a syllabary, and that's scholars call it an alpha syllabary for that reason. But they're just different writing systems around here. Modern South Arabian, I don't think it's written at all. Arabic is alphabetic. Maltese is the only Semitic language written in Latin script. It's spoken on the island of Malta. I'm getting off topic here. Stop me before Maltese is very interesting because it's the only Arabic dialect that did not exist sort of under the aegis of the Quran and the classical language. It went its own way, and there's a lot of Italian influence and vocabulary in Maltese. It's interesting for that reason. This is alphabetical. All of these are alphabetical. So it's basically an east-west split on the alphabet, with Ethiopian sort of being in the middle from the writing point of view. Interesting.
Yeah, my concern is it's interesting, some write from left to right, some
Yep.
from right to left. And I know Egyptian can be any direction, right?
That is correct. The Egyptian never lost. Egyptian is a
I-
very aesthetic writing system, the hieroglyphs, and they wrote the characters in the ways that look the best to their mind. It's very interesting that.
Yeah.
But you're right. It's never it never became a very practical writing system.
So
Yes.
yeah, so look like the left and the right is not that important, kind of like random, you know.
I have studied many Semitic languages. I'm a native speaker of English, and I don't even notice the difference. It's not an issue, not an issue in processing. Yeah, why one went right to left and Latin went left to right? It's probably random.
I was under the impression that early ancient Greek writing was done left to right, left, right, like plowing. I think they described it as like plowing a field. You went across and you came back.
That is true. Booster feedon is as the ox plows, is that's how they started. They eventually switched to uniform direction though. So yeah, there's all sorts in Asian languages, you get vertical ordering.
I think left to right makes sense because most of the people are right-handed, so you will not mess up, right? So
is there uniform handedness across ethnic groups? I don't know. I mean, Europeans more right-handed than Semitic peoples? I don't know. Because it would. A lot of the direction of writing has a lot to do with you don't want to smudge the text.
I mean, an interesting facet of Greek is that when you look at ancient Greek pots, frequently they'll have characters on the pot speaking. You know, there's a word speaking, and the sequence of the letters will be the word starts closest to the character's mouth. So if the character is looking to its right, then the letter order will be left to right. And if the character is looking to the left, then the letter order is opposite. Where we show, so the word starts closest to the character's mouth.
Oh, that's interesting.
Okay. Well, just for the record, I'm left-handed and I love fountain pens.
And why? I'm right-handed, so I'm trying to indicate the problems of a left-handed person. That would be difficult.
You don't have to push down on them if you don't get writer's cramp, and they just look cool. So maybe smudging the ink is something I can work around. I just put up with that. I don't know.
Well, ink doesn't smudge today as much as it used to, I suspect.
Well, in fountain pens, it does. It's smudging ink.
Oh, yeah. Oh, yes. Oh, yeah. One other feature of Ugaritic writing is, although, as I said, it was completely consonantal, I kind of lied to you because there's one exception, a good one, an excellent, a fascinating one. I keep using that word. For writing the glottal stop, there's the glottal stop. A glottal stop is a sound, in English, we don't really use it as a standard sound in the language, but it's like in that English pronunciation of bottle. There's a sound used by just quickly closing the vocal cords and opening them. It's called a glottal stop. But in most Semitic languages, they have a single letter for it. In Ugaritic, on their own, this is something else they invented. They invented in effect, a syllable for glottal stop plus the vowel A. And at the end of the alphabet, you find glottal stop plus the vowel I, glottal stop plus the vowel U. We don't know why they did it, but it is somewhat alphabetic. And that also, I should say the decipherment was a matter of not just looking at Akkadian words and at Ugaritic words and Akkadian documents with the vowels indicated. This writing with the vowels of the glottal stop gave a great impetus to the interpretation of the language, because glottal stops are pretty frequent in Ugaritic, so you can tell what the vowels are. And that also, it's sort of, the influence goes both ways. By looking at words containing these, vowel signs, it made it easier to line up Ugaritic words with other Canaanite languages too, and just made it much easier to, oh, this matches what's in Hebrew, so this is the actual reading of this word. But it's just a fascinating feature. Now, Arabic also has something similar, but I've never seen it discussed. Arabic is also like this. It doesn't write the short vowels in the writing system, but it does in when their glottal stop, called the hamza in Arabic, it does indicate the vowels. But it's a fairly uncommon phenomenon and not completely understood. But I'm just throwing that in. I'm giving you a lecture that giving you a talk that conducts 2 hours, but these issues get very detailed and ugly, actually. So I've simplified to some extent. Now, Ugaritic what is Ugaritic like? Ugaritic is a Semitic language, which means it has a triliteral root structure, which is unique among words. Actually, I realize now that that's a misstatement. Egyptian has a triliteral root structure. It's considered a cousin language to Semitic. It's not a Semitic language, but Ugaritic has a triliteral root structure, which means the consonants of a word indicate the semantic meaning of a word. The vowels, along with prefixes and suffixes, indicate the grammatical role of a word. For example, in Ugaritic, there's a verb malaka, and we don't know where the accent went in Ugaritic. You generally assume it was like Arabic, so the stress will go on the first syllable, malaka, but it could be malaka, which is a distinct possibility. It could have been malaka, which is unlikely, because other Semitic languages don't accent the last syllable. But that's a verb meaning he ruled. Malk is a noun meaning king. Mulk is a noun meaning kingship or sovereignty. Malkat, a noun meaning queen. Now, Malkat may remind you of Hebrew Malka, queen. It's the same word. And all these vowels, to answer Paul's question from earlier, this is assuming vowel sequences from Arabic supported by roots that contain a glottal stop, so we can tell what the vowel is. Oh, I should mention the syllable structures are more restrictive in Semitic languages than in a language like English. Consonants always begin a syllable. In English, you can have a syllable consisting only of a vowel, like alike and upon, that the first segment is a syllable in itself consisting of only a vowel. But in Semitic languages, syllables always begin with consonants. So ma, la, ka. And you can have 2 consonants at the end, malk and mulk, and malk. You can close a syllable with a consonant, mal, kat, but that's about it. That's rather restrictive. That undoubtedly had something to do with the decision not to write vowels in the early alphabets, because unlike English, if you don't write the vowels, if you just have MLK, you may not know what the vowels are, what the value is, but you know where they are in the word. You can't have, I gave you that that example earlier, that imaginary example of LK. If you had a word LK, if English wrote without vowels, you would have no idea not only of the value of the sounds. Is it look? Is it leak? Is it like? You also wouldn't even know where the vowels were, because you would be writing LK with it could be matched with a word like alike, which begins with a vowel. But that doesn't happen in Semitic. So from the information theory standpoint, it was probably they probably weren't that aware of what the vowels, what vowels were and what function. They just saw a root, and they just saw the MLK, and from the overall context, they could fill in the vowels because they knew where to put them. That's very simplistic, I'm sure, but there's something along that line had something to do with the lack of vowel indicators in the early alphabets. But anyway,
John,
yes.
Did you say that Semitic languages never start with a vowel in words?
The syllables don't, the classical Semitic languages, yes, but other Semitic languages.
I mean, I'm just thinking of just the Hebrew words from mother and father. Imad.
Oh, but there's a glottal. it's spelled with an aleph, those words, which means there's a glottal stop at the beginning. A glottal stop is considered a full consonant in the Hebrew phonological system. So in English,
How would
we
you pronounce that? I mean, let's take the word ima, mother.
So I'm a native English speaker. I'm not sure I'm getting the precise quality of that glottal segment at the beginning, but it's there. Your own phonetics always just, it's what you can pronounce, and sometimes you can't perceive what's is there. We don't have any ancient Semites in the group. I will say some Semitic languages eliminated a bunch of sounds, including Akkadian. They got rid of the glottal stop in all positions, which meant that all words that all syllables that previously began with a glottal stop were now beginning with a vowel. So
I can also think of several Hebrew words that stress the last syllable, like
such as
avodah means work, arba'ah for four.
I would say that's stressed on the first.
Avodah.
Avodah. I'm trying to think what modern. Let's go down. Ethiopic never stresses on the last. I'm talking about tendency mainly. Arabic rarely stresses on the last. In Arabic, the rule is if you have never stress the last syllable. If the second from the last is long, stress that. If there's no long syllable in second to last position, stress the one further back. Avodah. I think statistically, let's see, Katav, yeah, I made a misstatement. I grant you that. I think I was confusing Hebrew with Ethiopic right there.
And certainly possible that modern Hebrew has changed the pronunciation.
Yeah, we don't stress in the notation of the Masoretes. They were the medieval rabbinical family that sort of standardized the notation of the vowels. They didn't worry about stress much, I don't think. So we don't know that much in stress. Usually people assume stress from an ancient language like Ugaritic, just assume it's like Arabic where we know what the rules were, but there's no justification for that except that they are related. Anyway, so the consonant sequence, this is MLK is called the root. That indicates the semantic area of ruling. You know, he will, king, kingship, queen. It's common to all words derived from that root. MLK is called, as I said, it's called the root. And roots in Semitic languages mostly consist of 3 consonants. There are some ones with 4 consonants, but they're mostly 3. And that's unique in the world's languages. And so the vowels, by contrast, indicate the part of speech and the precise meaning. See, Malachi has the vowel sequence AAA, which is typical of some types of verbs. Okay. So, where are we? Well, enough. Let me move on to the religion part of the talk. Oh, there's another slide. Now you can see this is a vocabulary list, just a few words to show words in Ugaritic and how they, and the words in Hebrew and what the meaning is. I've picked some basic vocabulary, and there's the glottal stop. They wrote it, they pronounced it. Now I'm not entirely sure about modern Hebrew, how that, but it was there in ancient Hebrew. I could put Arabic on the slide. They have a glottal stop as well. Ugaritic shows an udun, and Hebrew ozon. This is the word for God. We'll be talking about that more. It's probably il in Ugaritic, another glottal stop. El, Elohim in the Bible. Head, kudkud. There's a rare word in Hebrew, kod, occurs in the Bible. Bit, Ugaritic daughter is bit. In Hebrew, of course, it's bat, as in bat mitzvah, the word for daughter. Dalt is the word Ugaritic for door, delit. Now, there are differences between, and if you notice, most of the differences are in the vowels, because Hebrew underwent the Ugaritic ones are older than Hebrew. Hebrew developed a very complicated set of phonetic changes, which are not completely understood. but you ended up with, for Dalt, the consonants stayed the same, but the vowels changed. Delit, Yad is hand, is the same. Naha is river, the same. Now, a lot of the sameness is because we assume the Ugaritic is like the Hebrew. So it's kind of somewhat circular. You have to look at the exact chain of evidence. You know, if they found there's no glottal stop in Naha, so this is probably just assumed that it's like Hebrew, and that's where the guesswork comes in. Now, let me move on to Ugaritian religion, because in many ways, this is the most important aspect of Ugaritic, if you're a historian of religion in particular. Now, some of the texts at Ugarit recount Ugaritian myths and legends, describing their gods. And their texts, the Ugaritian texts, allowed scholars to reconstruct their religion. These texts are the earliest known documents that reflect the Canaanite religious mind from which the Israelite religion emerged. And so this was the most important find in biblical studies of the 20th century. Now, the Ugaritians had a pantheon of gods that was similar to that of the later Phoenicians and probably the pre-monotheism Israelites. I'll get into that in a little bit. The head of the pantheon was El. El is the Hebrew. For some reason, scholars use the Hebrew pronunciation for El, and that's conventional. The Ugaritians probably pronounced it as Il, because they use that funny glottal stop sign with the I vowel following it. And his epithets are things like the king, the father of gods, so it indicates that he was the top god. So in the list that were found of deities and of the offerings made to them, El generally precedes the other major gods. El's name is also a common noun meaning God. Its precise etymology is uncertain. Two major theories derive it from roots meaning strong or first. So in his role as head of the pantheon, El, the Ugaritic El, is well attested throughout the Semitic world. Compare, for example, the Arabic cognate Allah, which literally means the God. Simply God. Islam attached the definite article to the name to emphasize that he is a self-sole God, but etymologically, it's the same name as the Hebrew and the Ugaritian one. Now, El also, interestingly, the El also receives the epithets, the merciful and the kind, and that sounds suspiciously like, Allah, the merciful and the kind in Arabic. So whether this is accidental or what, I don't know. In Arabic, it's the kind, the compassionate, Rahmanim Rahim. So from this similarity, and we'll discuss it further below and provide more examples, it is clear that the language used to describe a pagan god, in a polytheistic system, could survive the transition from polytheism to monotheism. Even though the doctrines changed, the language did not. Now, the home of El is a mountain from whose base flow the true rivers that are the source of all fresh water in the world. There he lives in a tent, and there the sons of El, he had sons, the sons of El, the divine assembly over which he presides, meet. In Ugaritic art, El is depicted as a bearded patriarchal figure. Excuse me, this picture is actually Baal, that's another god that you're seeing. Now, Baal was the storm god, and he was probably holding a club or a spear in that image. And it's a little bit confusing. El is described as the lead god, but at a certain point, Baal definitely became the dominant one. And now it's a little bit unclear who's the top god at what time. Now, the best explanation for this is that Canaanite theology was not static. It looks as if El was early on the head of the pantheon, but Baal was emerging as the dominant Canaanite deity. For why, we don't know, I don't think. Baal, by the way, is the Ugaritic god of agricultural fertility and the city's divine patron, as his title, Lord of Ugarit, shows. Baal's home is on Mount Safon, a high peak north of Ugarit, and often visible from it. Oh, I should have included a picture. It's very impressive, the mountain. Now, Baal is depicted on a stela from Ugarit with a club in one hand and a lightning bolt in the other. In the text, he is often given the accoutrements of a storm, clouds, wind, and rain. Now, there are three major goddesses in the religious texts: Astarte, a familiar name mentioned only in passing, Asherah, and Anat. Asherah is El's consort and the mother of the gods. Unfortunately, the only goddess with a vivid character is Anat. She is Baal's sister and is closely identified with him as a successful opponent of sea, death, and other destructive powers. Those sea and death are used as names. They're gods, but bad gods. Now, her fierce temper is directed against gods and mortals alike. She has some macabre aspects, such as the charming habit of wearing a necklace of human heads and a belt of human hands. In that respect, she resembles the Hindu goddess Kali. There were other gods. Kotha Chassis was the craftsman of the gods, who was thought to live far away, either in Crete to the west or in Egypt to the south. This may be an echo of Ugarit's need for foreign artisans. Ugarit's art used motifs from both Crete and Egypt, but the dominant source was Egypt. Kotha Chassis is in fact similar to the Greek Hephaestus. He is a master artisan whose skill provides the gods with weapons and palaces. Death is another god. He is Baal's adversary and embodies the forces of sterility and drought. The desert is Death's domain. His underworld home could be reached by raising the two mountains that block its entrance. The underworld is a damp, watery place called the swamp, the pit, and filth. Ugarit's gods are large, they travel by giant strides, and their control over human destiny is absolute. Since they are personified, the deities embody the realities beyond human understanding and control. Storms, the powerful drives of sex and violence, the final mystery of death. Now, the gods belong to a divine society that mirrors society on earth. Both share the patriarchal institute of kingship, for example. Now, to go further, as I've said, the religious language used at Ugarit is closely related to biblical Hebrew, as well as to other ancient languages of the region, including Phoenician, Aramaic, and Moabite. The poetic techniques, the poetic techniques used by the Ugaritian authors have much in common with those employed in the Bible. As in biblical poetry, the chief formal characteristic of Ugaritic verse is the use of parallelism. In this kind of verse, a single idea is repeated twice or three times using repetitions, synonyms, or antonyms. Now, I put a snippet of Ugaritic poetry on the slide side by side to some verses from the Bible, the Hebrew Bible. Not only do you find similarity of the verse structure using parallels, but the lines themselves, the actual language is eerily alike. Now your enemy Baal, now you will kill your enemy, now you will not annihilate your foe. This is not touchy-feely stuff here. Behold your, this is from a psalm, behold your enemies. I sort of feeling the taboo. Scholars always say Yahweh, but because that is the actual name, but in Jewish tradition, the observant always say Adonai here, Lord. Instead, I'll say Adonai to respect anybody's sensitivities, but scholarly convention is to use the Y word. Behold your enemies, Adonai, behold your enemies have perished, all evildoers have been scattered. You will take your eternal kingship, your dominion forever and ever. Your kingdom is an eternal kingdom, your rule is forever and ever. Now, these are in two different languages, apparently. Now, this coincidence of style and formula is not at all surprising given the shared tradition of Canaanite and Israelite poets. The cultural continuum of ancient Canaan, stretching from northern Syria to the Egyptian border, included not only material objects, but also literary and religious expression as well. Now, as a linguistic aside, the extensive use of parallelism also aids in clarifying obscurities in the Ugaritic. Many words in Ugaritic, as I said, have no apparent cognates, counterparts in other Semitic languages, and their precise meaning is therefore unknown. Synonymous parallelism often provides a possible or even a probable sense. You just assume foe means the same as enemy, for example. If you don't know what foe means, I'm speaking about Ugaritic here. Now, also characteristic of Ugaritic poetry is the repetitive use of epithets as seen in the well-known from the Iliad and the Odyssey. Baal is often called the rider on the clouds, as is Adonai at one point in the Hebrew Bible. Baal is also called Dagon's son. El is mentioned as the kind, the compassionate, the bold, the father of time and father of humanity. In the myths, there is standard description of banquets and journeys, the offering of sacrifice. Of course, this is as in Greek. As in Greek, it reflects the essentially, all this repetitiveness reflects the essentially oral nature of the poetry. Now, looking at it from the other side, this is a picture of Anat, the goddess, and she's holding something, I don't know what. I couldn't get very good resolution on this. The Bible contains many direct references to Canaanite religious beliefs and practices. Not surprisingly, given the writers are monotheistic and the Canaanites, the older Canaanites were polytheistics, the references are almost universally hostile and thus are presumably unreliable as descriptions of what the rites and the practices were. Now, Ugarit, with the discovery of Ugarit and its thousands of texts, we have an extensive and primary source for the study of Canaanite religion. This is what preceded the Hebrews, before the Jews were Jews, if I could put it that way. This will enable us to reinterpret the biblical evidence concerning the Canaanites and also give us a better understanding of the Tanakh, the Hebrew Bible, as the Ugaritic tablets are the best available source for the background that Israelite monotheism emerged from. A good starting point is to compare the principal Canaanite deities with their biblical counterparts. The head of the pantheon, El, also appears in the Bible. His name and its variant, Elohim, is usually used as a term for God, but sometimes it serves as a proper name. Quote, this is from another psalm, God, they're using the word Elohim, has taken his place in the assembly of El. That's what it says. It's not Elohim. It's Elohim has taken his place in the assembly of El. In the midst of the gods, Elohim, he chose judgment. There's another example where a distinction is made between the earlier and later names of the God of Israel. Elohim spoke to Moses. This is from Exodus. Elohim spoke to Moses and he said to him, I am Adonai. I appeared to Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob as El Shaddai, but by my name, Adonai, I was not known to them. Note the multiplicity of names for God in the Bible is quite puzzling. The expression El Shaddai means El of the mountain. Why do we know that? Because Shaddai doesn't mean mountain in Hebrew, because we have an Akkadian word Shadu, which works as a cognate, a counterpart to Shaddai. So it means, and Shadu means mountain. It's a normal Akkadian word for mountain. So the expression El Shaddai means El of the mountain. As I mentioned before, El lived on a mountain. This is the Ugaritic El. The cosmic mountain that was the source of fresh water and the seat of the divine assembly. Also, the God of Israel, also like El, the God of Israel presided over the assembly of the gods, as in the opening two chapters of Job. In Job, it has that very interesting, Job is a fairly late book in the Bible, but the story is that Satan comes to God and asks permission to torment Job. It's a wonderful work of world literature. But Satan also comes with beings that are called the B'nai Ha-Elohim, which translates as the children of the gods. Now, they appear before Yahweh. It sounds like you have a divine assembly going. And I noticed I have a Jewish Publication Society translation of the Bible, and they translate B'nai Ha-Elohim as divine beings. Now, it's always striking. Once in a while, you just get sort of knocked in the face. There's a real note of polytheism in the Bible. They haven't completely wiped out. The Israelite theologians or the writers haven't eliminated all the polytheistic elements from their sacred texts. Now, other titles of El and Ugaritic also have echoes in the Bible. Adonai is called the Eternal One in Genesis. This is a parallel to El's title, the Father of Time. Now, of course, the older polytheistic Canaanite religion is vociferously attacked in the Bible, but there's the occasional odd fact that the name Baal, who's their storm god, was used by the Israelites in naming their children. Both Saul and David gave their children names containing Baal, as in Baal Yada, which means Baal knows. Now, one reason possibly for Baal's continuing popularity with the Israelites is that many of Baal's characteristics and much of the language used to describe were carried over to the Israelite god. Both El and Adonai are called rider on the clouds, as I mentioned. Some scholars, I probably should have quoted this, but some scholars think that Psalm 29 was originally a hymn to Baal. Its language is strikingly similar to a reader of the Baal myths. Like Baal, Adonai was the victorious warrior who had shown his mastery over the sea. Like Baal, Adonai revealed himself on a mountain in the midst of a storm. Like Baal, Adonai had a temple built of cedar. It actually looks increasingly like the Israelites combined features of the Canaanite deities, El, the father of the gods, and Baal, the storm god, to describe their deity Adonai. Turning to other Canaanite deities, we find traces of Anat, Asherah, and Astarte in the Bible. Particularly, Asherah seems to be mentioned in 2 Kings, where the evil Israelite king Manasseh restores the practices of the old religion. One such thing he does is that he places a sculpture of Asherah in the temple, of all places. And funny, I have a town near here called Manassas. How Manassas became a popular name in the Judeo-Christian world is beyond me, because he was, by Israelite standards, he was a really bad king. Manasseh is the source of the name Manassas, a commonplace name, but in America anyway. But strangely enough, in addition to being a name in Hebrew, the word Asherah is also a common noun in Hebrew, meaning a sacred tree or pole. Used in the goddess's worship, it was probably a fertility symbol. I've seen disagreement with that. And the Bible prohibits this form of Asherah worship. And from Deuteronomy, that very prescriptive book of the Bible, you shall not set up an Asherah of any wood next to the altar of Adonai your God. So as you can see, Canaanite motifs permeate the Bible. Most significant is the fusion of Baal language and El language in the descriptions of Adonai and his activity. Adonai may be unique, i.e. it's monotheistic, he is sole God, but the formulas that the Israelites used to describe him were not. They were shared with Ugarit's gods, which is why a great many Bible scholars devote the bulk of their attention to studying Ugarit texts. So with that, I will end. And are there any questions? Hello.
So John, you talk about the progression of El to Baal. Is it there's a parallel in Mesopotamia of Enlil being replaced by Marduk, associated with Babylon, and Marduk was the storm god.
Yeah, I hadn't thought about that, but you're right. Marduk was by the old Babylonian period, Marduk was the major god in Babylon. But Enlil was the original top god.
And it's usually interpreted in a political way, that it represents the ascendancy of Babylon over the states of Mesopotamia under Hammurabi.
Yeah, I know the Hammurabi dynasty, they really pushed Marduk as the major god.
The other point is that when you showed the map of all the destructions in the late Bronze Age, and it included 2 Mesopotamian cities, Nippur and Sippar.
Yes.
But I think it's pretty clear, isn't it, that those cities were destroyed by the Elamites? That there's literature about King Nebuchadnezzar I.
Yeah, it's a close in time.
Retrieving the statue of the god Marduk that had been taken from the Elamites, and he's right about that exact time.
Yes, you're right. I probably should have clarified. Sea Peoples probably did not make it to Mesopotamia. It would have been an Elamite expedition at the same time. It's funny. Some of the major finds of Mesopotamian history, for like the famous Code of Hammurabi, were actually found in the Elamite capital because they had been taken as booty from that period in the late Bronze Age. So
you were mentioning it. Oh, go ahead. Go ahead.
Oh yeah. A question on the you said that I didn't catch the word. You say grabble start. How to spell it? The word start like alike. Also.
Excuse me.
I think you mentioned the word. I don't get it. When you talk about the vowel, you start it at the beginning. You call it the grabble start, like the
glottal stop. Yeah, it's a sound. I don't think you find it in Asian languages, but it's a sound you find all over Semitic. And it's
so how to spell that word? How to spell that word? Glottal.
GL. L is as in lot. OTTAL.
GLOTTL.
GLOTTAL. Space stop STOP. It's just it's a phonetic term for
John.
sound. Yes.
Glottal stop. Okay. Thank
Jason, this sound that a glottal makes is sort of like if you have a sore throat and you are gargling with salt water, it's done deep down in your throat.
Okay,
Like a,
Yes.
is that like a Spanish R?
Well,
yeah, except it's in your throat.
Okay, that's a Spanish R, and in
No.
Russia also use a lot.
No, it's more like you're trying to get something out of your throat and you're making this sound.
Yeah, overall, the Semitic.
Spanish R is done with the tongue.
Yeah.
Oh, okay. So is that the semantic language?
Yeah,
Only in semantic.
Well,
Yes.
the Semitic languages are famous. They have a lot of sounds created in the throat.
All in the throat.
It's they
Can somebody pronounce it for me one time?
Look,
You have to do it rather than say it.
well, actually, even the word glottal stop contains a glottal stop. Because
Right.
you
Even
can say
which
glottal, or you could say glottal.
Grr.
Yeah.
Like you were saying grr, deep into, you're making the sound of a tiger. Grr.
Well, the
easiest
difference
example
in English, the glottal stop is just an occasional sound effect. It's not part of the
Right.
sound system. In languages like Ugaritic and Arabic, it was a consonant on the same level as B, P, L, whatever, all the consonants, and they used it that way. So
in English, it's seen as an impediment or
Yeah.
you know,
Yes.
a mispronunciation. And the prime example is the word bottle, which
Yeah,
many
bottle.
people would pronounce bottle,
yes,
and they swallow the T.
yes,
So that swallowing the T produces the glottal stop.
which means it's an occasional sound in English, but it doesn't make part of the sound system. Every language has a fixed, conventionalized set of sounds that it uses to distinguish meaning. That's an iron law of languages. If you don't have if all speakers of a language don't agree on the set of sounds they will use to distinguish meaning, then it's not a language. But that doesn't mean other sounds don't occur in the language. It's just they aren't used systematically, and the glottal stop in English is one of them. In Arabic and Ugaritic, in ancient Hebrew, they were used. Now, glottal stops, like a lot of throat sounds, they tend to disappear, which is, I assume, what happened in modern Hebrew. But they still retain the spelling with the aleph in Hebrew. Av is father. But what they actually pronounce, I think you're right, Paul. It's just a vowel there. But the ancient Hebrews, they wrote it, so they said it.
Another thing you mentioned on Elohim, and this is stuff that I get from my rabbi. He says that that even though the name Elohim sounds plural, in all its usages, it's accompanied with singular verbs.
Yeah,
So it's a bizarre sort of thing. It looks like it's plural, but it's as a grammatical element, it's always used in the singular.
Well, I don't have chapter and verse, so that really applies to I don't have chapter and verse. I think there are two main uses of Elohim. One is as a name, a personal name of God, which matches your case, takes a singular adjective. But what's really strange, it's used as just a descriptive term for the gods. Elohim. It's used in both ways.
The very first words of Genesis are
bara
Elohim.
Eta Shemayim ve'eta Aretz.
And bara is a singular verb.
Yes, that's right. But that's Elohim as the personal name, as the divine name. But as there are instances where it seems to be being used as a noun describing a group of gods.
Another informational thing that also my rabbi is Reform, and what he will typically do, rather than using the pronunciation of Yahweh, he'll say Yud-He Vav-He.
What's that?
Spell it out so that you know what he's talking about, but he's not actually pronouncing the words, which is not supposed to be done.
Yeah, it's a taboo thing.
A nice way of being able to be precise about what you're talking about, though I imagine that the Orthodox would be offended no matter what you do.
Yeah, I never know who's in the audience. It's a convention to use the real name in scholarship, both Jewish and non-Jewish. And the name, by the way, the Y name, the Y word, Its most popular etymology is it's a form of the verb to be, a causative, he who causes to be. That's the most popular etymology for what it means. Oh, another interesting thing is what's the religious group that uses the name Jehovah?
Jehovah's Witnesses.
Jehovah's Witnesses. Thank you. I get tired after 2 hours, but what they did in the 18th century was to take the consonantal structure of the divine name Adonai, YHWH, and combine it with the vowels of Adonai, hence Jehovah. Which they just combined the two consonants from one name, the vowels from another, and came up with a new name. So any more questions?
Yeah, I've got one. You're mentioning kind of a transition of leading gods. At some point, they studied the names, what the titles of kings, and that's maybe Sumerian, it's maybe pre-Semitic. And apparently they figured the kings transition from high priest into what they describe, I think the word is Lagash, which means big man. And they figured the religious guys were in charge, and then they were slowly pushed out by the warriors. Would that sort of, is that sort of the transition you're describing with leading gods and your Ugaritic gods?
Yeah, I looked through the literature. I didn't see any indication that we have enough information about Ugaritic sociology, political structure, to know what that transition from Ale to Baal did have, a political background. I mean, I haven't seen it discussed. That's all.
When I've read that transition from priest to king is usually in the context of very early Sumerian society. That the emergence of the kings happened essentially in the late 4th, early 3rd millennium. So it's very, very old, much, much older than any information that we have about Ugaritic.
Yeah, sort of I was suspecting, but it's interesting that happened.
Well, you can see changes in Christianity, saints rise and fall.
But you can also think about it this way, that the emergence of large economies in the southern Mesopotamia, typified by the city of Uruk, happened under the aegis and organization of the temples. The temples were the locus of organizing major irrigation projects and all of these major social engineering that was required to produce a society that had a very large agricultural surplus. And that's the point at which you become really attractive to raiders, and you need a king to protect it. So there's that economic interpretation of the transition from priest to king, that the priest basically presided over the expansion of economic productivity, and then they needed the king to protect it.
That makes perfect sense. Well, in this talk, Ugaritic is one of the more obscure languages of the world. It's completely dead, but I wanted to go beyond the linguistics to discuss why Ugaritic has greater significance than you might think.
A very enlightening talk, John. Thank you very much.
So. Yeah, you made me think about stress and Semitic some more. I have to go check my Hebrew.
This was wonderful, as it always is.
Oh, thank you.
Thank you so much, John. And we're waiting. You've offered maybe sometime in the future. You want to do. I forget the name of the language you just offered to do, but
Ethiopic. I was thinking.
Ethiopian, yeah. That would really be interesting.
It's a little known language, but it's still the religious language of the Ethiopian Christian Church, died out in the 14th century, so it's dead. But it has some descendants that are quite important, like Amharic. So,
one comment on another thing that you mentioned. You talk about the 3-consonant root in Semitic languages, that is a resource that's the source of a lot of Hebrew poetry and a lot of wordplay, because the all of the words are so connected in the roots of the language itself.
Yeah.
And you don't get this in translation unless there's a commentator that points it out. But there's a lot of wordplay in the Bible in which different forms of the same root are used in the same sentence or in contrasting sentences, and it's a major resource for Hebrew poetry in the Bible.
Yeah. Yeah, it's a unique feature of Semitic languages. Some have given it up to some extent, but it's something that in most languages, the core root consists of some combination of consonant, vowel, consonant. You can have two consonants at the beginning, two at the end. Like kill is a good example in English. The root is K-I-L-L. If you want to make it past tense, you say killed. If you want to make it future, you stick a little helping verb in front and said will kill, but you don't change the root itself. In Semitic, they go right into, they do a lot of their grammatical changes by just altering the vowels between the consonants. And now Indo-European used to do a lot of that in the past, but it's given it up mainly. In English, we have the regular verbs like kill that take that ed on the end, but then we have a residual class of older verbs which do something similar to what is done in Semitic languages, like eat and ate. I eat meat. I ate yesterday, where the consonants are staying the same, but we're varying the vowels, and that's in very. And when I always describe to people who don't know a Semitic language, imagine a language where every grammatical change is similar to speak, spoke, eat, ate, drink, drank, where everything is done that way, the vast majority of things. And you get the same, it's sort of a music in the language, and Arabic takes it the furthest because they play games with the vowel melodies. And you say he wrote is kataba, it was written, the passive is kutiba. They just flip the vowels. You have AA in the active and UI in the passive. And it's kind of a game they're playing, linguistically. But humans seem to take to it, but it doesn't predominate in too many of the world's languages. Usually the root is pretty fixed, the basic word. And,
Excellent. Thank you so much.
I hope that was clear.
Appreciate it again. Just to remind everybody, tomorrow we're getting together at 4 for Herod the Great. I hope you guys join us. And
who's presenting?
His name is actually on the his name is Rolf S. And he had presented most of the ancient Rome stuff, but he had done a significant research on this. So, and it would be, obviously a discussion as of today, as we have today. So what keeps this interesting, and I hope, John, you don't mind that we interrupt you. I apologize.
No.
It's amazing, and that's the way this group grows, is by, having like, back and forth two-way street. Really appreciate. What is the Sunday program? It's Herod the Great and the Jewish Revolt. So if it would be interesting if you guys want to join. But again, John, let me know about the Ethiopian language. Maybe sometime in the future, even since you may be a linguist in some of the languages you didn't study, but maybe we can have somebody in collaboration, or you can present like.
If you can, if we can find somebody, that'd be great. I wouldn't be comfortable doing one in ancient Chinese. That's too hard.
Well, we have Jason. We can,
Yes.
and that would be good because you seem to know a lot about that area. Again, Sunday we have, as I've mentioned, Herod the Great, and then tonight, if anybody is into Halloween special Chinese ghost stories at 7 p.m. Jason is presenting with his friend, so he's going to talk about Chinese ghost stories. So it's a part of Asian philosophy group. So today at 7, join us if you're interested. And November 1st, we kind of switch gears, and we have this thinking university that they want to present in our group, and they want to talk about does bribery, the bribery should be legal or not. So it should be interesting to kind of
Bribery.
yeah, in some countries, yeah. And then Richard is presenting on next Thursday, Zionism and Palestine mandate and Transjordan. So there will be a 56th session that Richard is presenting, followed by the Saturday development of Qi in Confucianism. Anybody wants to join? And then Jane on Sunday, November 6th, is doing Leonore of Aquitaine, Powerful Women series. So that would be at 3 p.m. And then we also have some other interesting ones. If anybody is interested to join us in person, if you're in New York, we're going to go to Jewish Museum November 12th. Then we have brief introduction of shamanism by Garrett P. Jackson on November 15th, if you're interested. And then we're actually also doing a Sunni Muslim introductions to Sufism by Musa Muhyiddin. That would be in December 6th. So anybody interested in that, to check that out. Besides other, I just pointed out the most interesting one. So I want to thank everybody. Thank you for a great discussion, John. Amazing presentation again. And then, hope you have the rest of the, hope you have a great weekend, the rest of the weekend.
Likewise.
Have a nice one.